All right, folks, we are just 4 days away from SEC football when South Carolina takes on North Carolina to kick off the out-of-conference season. We bring in Chad Niepling of Fansided, also V Sporto, to break down the SEC schedule. Let's look at each team. We're going to run through the East and the West, Chad, and we're going to put our necks on the line. Some predictions coming up here.
Yeah, I'm not the most comfortable person in the world with giving predictions just based on how the SEC has finished over the last couple seasons. You know, you didn't expect the Mississippi State to be a number one team for 4 or 5 weeks in the rankings. You know, an Ole Miss team that possibly could have been a 4-team playoff if they hadn't lost Treadwell the way they did. I mean, it's really it's really hard to guess, and you don't know who's going to be the quote-unquote sleeper or dark horse. There's always – it seems like there's a team that just comes up here as of late in the SEC that kind of mucks things up as we go.
Yeah, we have to kind of take into consideration Mizzou was picked to finish 4th last season. They were picked to finish 6th the season before. Obviously, they posted back-to-back 7-1 campaigns. Alabama is the pick in the West by the media, although – Auburn picked to win the SEC championship. We won't go into those vote totals, but there has not been a repeat SEC champion since Tennessee back in 1998. So it's been a long, long time.
That and we need to have somebody to represent the SEC and get to the national championship game. It's been 2 years, and a lot of flack's been thrown towards the SEC this offseason about its complacency maybe, or the fact that maybe the SEC has started to dwindle a little bit. So I think that it's time that a team gets back there. The problem is going to be, can we get a team there with just one loss? And I think that's going to be key. Will you see a 2-loss SEC team represented in the 14 playoff this year? I think that may be viable, just depends, but definitely anything more than that. I think at minimum, it's a 2-loss team.
Yeah, there are so many possible scenarios we could talk about, but the 2-loss SEC champion with 0 and 1 loss other league champions is going to be an interesting scenario for the College Football Playoff Committee to work out. And I think the byproduct of that that you've talked about in the past is the upsurge of the bottom half of the league, with Tennessee, now Kentucky expected to jump up. We saw what Arkansas did the last half of 2014. So there isn't a whole lot to beat up on when you look at the bottom half of the SEC right now. If there's any, it's in the SEC Eastern Division. So why don't you give us a look there, Chad?
Yeah, when I look here, the SEC East, I think there's far more disparity between the haves and have-nots in this division right now, just because you've got a couple things going on with Derek Mason making some shuffles at Vandy, taking over as the defensive coordinator and the head coach. They're still trying to get that program corrected if he can. I know it's a lot of people like to say that Vanderbilt has the opportunity to be a Stanford of the Southeastern Conference, because they are similar in a lot of ways, especially if you look at the educational front. But I think it's a lot of work to get done in the SEC conference when you're going up against some of these flagship premier universities that you do week in, week out. I think for me, that's a team that's really going to struggle this year, Mark. Again, I don't know if they can make it to a bowl. You had 2 teams left out of the East, Kentucky and Vanderbilt, last season being left out of bowl games, and I think Vanderbilt's one of those teams that possibly gets knocked out here this year. At most, I'm seeing this team possibly with 5 wins. So 5-7, 4-8, somewhere in that neighborhood. I just don't think they have the personnel there. Granted, Stephen Chu's back. I think they've got a fantastic running back. If he was at any other university, the guy would be a beast. We'd be talking about him as being one of the elite running backs in the conference. But that being said, I just think that the pieces around them just aren't there yet. But that's to say that I have confidence in Derek Mason. I don't want to take that away. So Vanderbilt, I'm saying 4, maybe 5 wins tops. Kentucky is the big question mark. Me and you were talking about this, Mark, kind of off before we started the show, and that was really, this year the culture has changed so much in Lexington that prior to this season, it was definitely, you could look at the schedule with several teams and basically say, no, they're going to lose. No, they're definitely going to lose that game. And then you turn around, you look at it this year, and you're kind of thinking, you know what, they might win this game. They might win that game. And there's a possibility. So the culture has changed. The recruiting has changed. You've got 4 or 5-star Matt Elam there on the front, the defensive tackle, who's going to be right behind Lewis at 6'2", I think 6'4", 340 pounds. So those two guys are going to be rotating in and out on the defensive front. I turn around, Tolles is going to be there. He's getting pushed in the quarterback position to be his best week in, week out. You got Boom Williams, of course, JoJo. Defensively, you got AJ Stamps. I think this team has got guys that are nationally or within the conference anyways are being recognized. So I look at Kentucky to actually do a bowl this year. I'm saying 6 or 7 wins for them. The key for me for these guys is that first stretch. The Lafayette game should be a no-brainer, but I think you'll be able to get a feeling for this team. At South Carolina, that's a game I think that is a hinge game for South Carolina themselves, and I'll talk about them next because last year South Carolina gave that game up in the fourth quarter, much like they did with Tennessee. So I think that this is a redemption game for South Carolina to kind of get their name back after coming off of that North Carolina matchup the first week. So I look at this game as a key game for both of these programs as far as tilting as to which way it's going to go for them. Of course, then you got Florida and Missouri to round out. I mean, that's pretty much your 3 top ones besides Georgia that they get later on in November. So I think if they could come out of September with at least a 2-2 out of there, I definitely think this team is definitely going to a bowl this year. So easily 6-6, 7-6, which I think would be a huge turnaround for Kentucky and Stoops and what they've been able to do. They've been hot on the recruiting trail, so we'll see. Missouri is a team that I hate to bet against any team, Mark, that's done 7-1 the last 2 seasons, and like you said before, has been voted by media members on multiple occasions to not be the SEC East Division champ. But let's just be honest, they've only gotten it right like 5 times out of the 23-plus years that it's been going, that the media has been allowed to vote on that. So not a very good track record, to say the least. But they didn't have guys like us voting on it, so that's the difference. You know,
that is key right there.
So Missouri this year, they get 3 really, pretty easy slates up front before they have to go to Kentucky. I think, again, I'm talking about Kentucky. People are going to be like, you're crazy. I think that Kentucky game when they go on the road, Missouri, is going to be a key telltale game. I think that Kentucky is going to be one of those teams to watch this season in the East. And could surprise some people and have a nice finish for their year and get to a bowl. But I think that's a key game for them. The South Carolina game, the Florida game, of course, usually whoever is the road team has won that series between Florida and Missouri. So Missouri, their first year on the road, Florida comes in, or the first year to the SEC, Florida comes in and beats them. Then you turn around and vice versa happens the next season. So I look at that game. The Georgia game for Missouri is going to be key if they want to get back to the SEC Eastern Division title. I think they've got to beat a Georgia on the road. Or hope that Georgia does the typical Georgia thing and flops on one of these games that we've seen in the past. That's how they've done here lately. And, of course, they draw Arkansas at the end of the season. Not that the Arkansas game is going to be a huge tilt as to whether or not they get to the Eastern title, but I think them going on the road with this forced rivalry that's been pushed upon those two teams, I feel like this is going to be a game that they're going to have to be competitive in. Their defensive front is going to be it's going to be in a lull this year. It's not where their experience is. Their experience is in the linebacking position with the Cantrell brothers. They've had a lot of movement in their offseason with coaching positions as well. So I'm curious if Pinkel can revive that and revitalize that defense and get them back to prominence and get them back to the Eastern Division. If they do, I don't know, does Missouri earn respect after that third time around? I don't know. We'll see. South Carolina. South Carolina, for me, is a team that I have a hard time, Mark, really committing to a record with that team because I feel like there's so much talent on there, and with the change of Hope coming in and they're going back to their base 4-3 defense instead of that disastrous 3-4 experiment last year with Ward. So I think, and Hoke's going to be calling a lot of those. Hoke was with Spurrier in Florida. They had some really good teams there. They've got the talent. I think that linebacking unit with Sky Moore and those guys are going to be phenomenal. They've got a bunch of young talent in the secondary. I think they've got, they released their depth chart today. Their official depth chart was released today. I think they've got a lot of talent. Mitch, of course, was named the starter, which me, you, and everybody's mom knew that for the last year or so that's who it was going to be. But I do think Nunez is going to be a guy that comes in with special packages and can be a difference maker for those guys. And, of course, for me, Williams, more so than Wilds, I think Williams is the running back to watch. I think this guy is your next Lattimore. He's your next Mike Davis. He's going to be the next big running back out of South Carolina by the time you get to midseason. So, for me, I'm thinking they're 7-6 at best. at best 8-4, Mark. If they were to go 8-4, that is huge, I think, with this team because they are so young, but they've got a hot 2016 recruiting class coming in that can make a world of a difference for this team going into the 2016 season. So, Georgia, they're voted every year, I think, Mark, to be the top guys to finish in the East, and for whatever reason, there's one game they just give up, and I can never scrap the game that they played against Boise in those hideous red uniforms and just got smacked on national television in Atlanta. So I can never get that out of my mind. And because of that, under Rick, you've seen that. This guy's had the longest tenure of any SEC coach, I believe, as a head coach in the conference. And just for whatever reason, he just always falls short. And so for me, their first month or so, they get South Carolina, which is it doesn't matter what the record is. It doesn't matter what the expectation is for either team. That game, all that goes out the window. These two teams can play completely different when they play each other. South Carolina needs this game, I think, more so than Georgia does. But that being said, Georgia needs to win every game they can in the East if they want to get to that Eastern Division and represent as the Eastern Division champion in the SEC championship game. So I look at that as a marquee game for them. And then, of course, they've got a weak Southern. Alabama. Drawing Alabama, to me, is huge this season for them to have to face against that team. At home, they get them at home, so maybe they can have something happen. I think that the uncertainty at the quarterback position really scares me for them. And, of course, they've had some injuries at the wide receiver position. Chubb is going to be a beast. That offensive line is probably one of the most underrated in the conference for Georgia. So that's going to be an interesting matchup when Alabama goes between the hedges to face up against to face them at home. At Tennessee, I think Tennessee gets them on the road, and that's just me off the cuff. I think they get them on the road. Missouri, of course, is going to be another key one. At Florida, which is a neutral site with the Jacksonville game. Kentucky at Auburn. That Auburn game could have a lot more riding on it by the time that gets there because Auburn could be in the position where they're looking at possibly having their name brought up to be in the 14 playoff if they, if everything goes accordingly. So I think that's a key game for Auburn. Too bad Georgia is going on the road there for one of the South's deepest, the Deep South's oldest rivalry, actually. So then Georgia Southern, and then at Georgia Tech, you don't want to ever bet against Georgia Tech in that triple option threat. So I'm saying 9-3 for Georgia. Right off the top of my head, 9-3, at worst 8-4 for them. And then, of course, Tennessee. Let me get to Tennessee because I know a lot of people, I do a Tennessee podcast, and Mike is probably going to watch this, and Mike's a good friend of ours, and there for Last Words on Sports. I'm giving you an innocent plug, Mike, so you can thank me later. But Tennessee, honestly, if they go 8-4 this year, 9-3, that team, that to me is a huge turnaround for this team. If they go 8-4, 9-3, I think that's, Butch Jones deserves an award. There's still a lot of youth on this team. The offensive line, I think it's been drummed to the point now where we've literally beaten on it so much that, there's really nothing left. It's just the pulp at this point. That offensive line really scares me. I do think Dobbs is the natural leader on that offense. They're stacked. You want to talk about wealth at the quarterback position. I don't know that there's anybody in the country that has the talent that they've got at that position behind Dobbs. You've got North at back off of injury. They do have some key guys that are injured, but they pushed Jennings from the quarterback position to wide receiver. He's looked really good here this fall camp. And, of course, then you're talking about Kamara. And bringing in a guy that, was at Alabama, had to go to JUCO for a year to get his act straight. Now he's at Tennessee. He's got a second shot at the SEC with an up-and-coming team. You got Khalil Mack there, Tuttle. They're going to be right at the two deep on defensive tackle. You can't forget about Barnett, Majid. I mean, they've got a lot of defensive guys. They've lost two of their starting safeties this last week due to injury. I feel like if they lose any more in that secondary, that could be enough to maybe hinder how the outcomes of these games come this season. I really do. I think they're at that point. They can't lose anybody else. They lost Marcus Jackson on the offensive line due to injury. So I look at this team, and you can't lose any more guys. You're going to get nervous if you start losing more guys, but I look at key games for them. The Oklahoma game for Tennessee is going to be huge. You're going to learn a lot about Tennessee versus Oklahoma. You're going to learn how far this team has progressed, where they're at mentally, physically, and is this youthful team going to be able to make make a run in the SEC this season? It's an early game. Should work out for Tennessee's favor since they are at Neyland. I expect that house to be packed out with 101 plus screaming fans. You turn around and they're going to Florida on the road. Can they break that 10 season streak? You know, they've lost to Florida for 10 in a row. Can they break that? That's a key game for me. And I think they do this year. Arkansas on October 3rd, 2 hot up and coming teams that are going to be playing right there in Knoxville on that October 3rd Saturday. That's a game you don't want to miss. You want to talk about smash mouth football. It's going to be that offensive line of Arkansas's versus that defensive front, Khalil Mack total that I talked about, Barnett. I mean, it's going to be an awesome game in the trenches to watch. I think that's a game that literally is a flip. Vegas has it, I think, at like a 3 or a 5. So that's literally telling you that they don't know at this point. You got Georgia, which is a key game. Like I said, coming home, I think Tennessee pulls that out. At Alabama, I don't think Tennessee's ready to beat an Alabama team yet. I just don't think they're there. At Kentucky, this is going to be a key game for this Tennessee team. They've got to win this game in dominant fashion, I believe. South Carolina at home, I think they could possibly get South Carolina. North Texas, no problem. And then, of course, at Missouri and Vanderbilt, honestly, if this team, like I said, if they go 9-3, 8-4, it's a world beater to me. So that's where I'm looking at for Tennessee, and that's my Eastern Division.
So, Chad, since you started with Vandy, I'm assuming that you ended with Tennessee being the Eastern Division champion. Is that the call?
No, man. I don't know if I can do that one, Mark. I don't know if I'm that committed to it, man. And like I said, I don't want to vote. I don't want to go against Missouri at this point. You know, I did the bandwagon thing when I did my vote this year, and I put Georgia as the Eastern Division winner because I do think they've got the strongest team personnel-wise to be able to do it. But again, for whatever reason, they always choke in the big games. I don't know why, but they don't have the big non-conference game that they usually do to have that happen. But they do have 2 tough teams out of the West.
So Chad, I'm going to bail you out just a little bit here because I put the 45 seconds of research into these predictions. Chad put like 42 seconds less than that into these predictions. We jumped on here and Chad's like, what are we talking about? And I said, well, we got like 3 or 4 days to the season. We got to throw some predictions out there. And Chad's like, seriously? So, yeah, I at least gave it like 30 seconds look before you did. So I got to start with Vandy. I got to say that, you know, it was this time last year coming off back-to-back 9-win seasons under James Franklin that I was just shocked that as a 13-point favorite at home, they came out of the gate. They lost by 30 to Temple at home, couldn't score an offensive touchdown. And then that was just the precursor to the rest of the fallout for the rest of the season. 3 quarterbacks played. It was just ugly on offense in particular, ugly all over the place, but specifically the offense, the passing game, atrocious. You mentioned the tight end, sure. Steve Shue, an exceptional player, and he's been the pass offense for those 12 games last season. Vandy's not going to win in the SEC. I see them winning 3 out of conference games. They probably lose to Houston and finish at 3-9. Derek Mason looks a little overwhelmed, not just game day, but when he approaches the mic, when he's at the podium, he's either going to grow into the job or he's not going to be able to assert himself and get it done there. We shall see. Kentucky, yeah, very interesting club here because they've racked up back-to-back top 20 recruiting classes under Mark Stoops, and they have that stretch that you talked about, Chad, that I find intriguing because the teams that they're competing with, assuming they're not ready for Tennessee and Georgia yet, and I hate to discount Mizzou and give them no respect here. I'm downgrading Mizzou to Kentucky's range, but after Louisiana Lafayette at South Carolina, Florida, and Mizzou, we're going to know a lot about Kentucky, more than anybody practically in the league, because those are the 3 teams that they're competing against. If they fare well, if they win 2 out of 3, something like that, it could be a really nice season for the Wildcats, who were a couple calls away from getting to a bowl game last year after winning 5 games and really had that stunner at Florida that went to overtime and couldn't pull that one out, took Mississippi State to the wire at home. So Patrick Tolson company could be ready to break out, and I definitely could see 6 or 7 wins here. That being said, I think it's going to be an excruciating miss again at 5-7 and 2-6 in the SEC. So I see Kentucky tied with Florida. I got the Gators also at 2-6 in the league, 5-7 overall. Issues along the offensive line. If there is one spot that I would not want to enter an SEC season, not prepared, not having the manpower and the experience, it would be offensive line, because then everything else blows up. Especially since they want to go with the less mobile quarterback in Greer over Treon Harris at quarterback. Most likely Greer's been reported in camp as being the better player. He's the more accurate passer. He's more comfortable in the passing game, and all that works out well long-term for Jim McElwain. But you would almost, if you're more concerned about this season and keeping a quarterback out there, keeping him upright and moving the change, you would want the mobile quarterback. I think McElwain's making the better pick for the future in the long run and going with Greer. But considering this offensive line, it's going to be tough to watch Florida try to navigate against SEC defenses. That said, they have some very winnable games out of conference. I think they win 2 in conference. The East Carolina games, just coming, about 3 games after they played them in the bowl season last year. And then, of course, they end up with Florida State. For Florida, if they can physically and mentally make it through this stretch from September through October, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Mizzou, LSU, Georgia, if they could squeak out one upset and get through that and be like 4-5 or something in that range at that point, it will have been a successful season for Jim McElwain. But I've got him going at 5-7. All right, let's tee up South Carolina next. I've got the Gamecocks coming in at 3-5, 6-6 in the conference. You alluded to the big recruiting class coming in 2016, which is a big surprise, and credit Steve Spurrier for getting that kind of jump on 2016, considering the rumors swirling about his future, and he hasn't exactly put his foot down and said what he's going to do past this season. So South Carolina opens up with North Carolina. That's probably going to be a win. Wouldn't be a shocker if they lost that one at home against North Carolina, but I think the Gamecocks win that one. I think they lose out of conference against Clemson. I think the Tigers are one of the top 10 teams in the country. So in conference, again, they're clumped in that group with Florida and Mizzou to a certain extent, if the Tigers fall off as expected, and Kentucky, where South Carolina's got to win those games against those teams that are their equals. And you could even throw Tennessee. I know Tennessee hasn't proven it. People are expecting them to jump up and be serious contenders for this division. But if it doesn't happen, they're certainly in that group as well. South Carolina does draw a couple difficult assignments out of the division. And that's one of the things that we really have to zero in on here. So you got your division opponents, and then who do you draw from the other division? And when you're looking at the West, you can't draw anyone easy, but you can draw somebody easier. They've got Texas A&M. They got LSU. Those are going to be 2 very difficult games to win. So South Carolina, I've got at 3-5 in the conference. I got them going 6-6, and I credit their non-conference scheduling because they know they have to face Clemson. That's the game for them out of conference. Then they tack on a North Carolina and a Central Florida, who just went to a BCS game 2 years ago, and I got to credit the Gamecocks for going out there and scheduling some teams. All right, I got Mizzou. So, no respect for Mizzou again this year. I do have them going 8-4 because I think they sweep the non-conference slate here. I think they can push through. They've got the one challenge against BYU in late November, kind of an interesting game that was sandwiched in there between Mississippi State and Tennessee, where most of the SEC teams are taking that week off, or typically the next week before they gear up for the rivalry games. Mizzou went out and scheduled BYU. So that should be interesting. The Cougars will be tough. They're coming off 8-5. The Tigers, the issue that I have with them is that their calling card for the past few seasons, and really going back through most of the Gary Pinkel era, has been defensive pass rush. They've led the SEC in sacks the past 2 years. They lose 2 of the best in Marcus Golden and Shane Ray. I don't know that they can replace those 2 guys, although the linebacking core in the back 7 is really good. lack of playmakers on offense, I think, hurts this team. I expect a decent season out of Matty Mock. I think a lot of the issues and a lot of the criticism he took last year was undeserved. He did only complete 53% of his passes, but definitely limited on the outside, minus the two big playmakers he had the year before in Washington and DGB. So Matty Mock is going to be tested here to pull out another division championship for Mizzou. I got the Tigers at 4-4 and 8-4 overall. So it comes down to Tennessee and Georgia. And like Chad, I've got Georgia going to Knoxville and coming up a loser. But unlike Chad, I've got a stalemate between Tennessee and Georgia. Therefore, I've got the Vols winning the East. So for Georgia,
you just got like a ton of followers just now from Knoxville. I'm just going to tell you that.
Vol Nation, they are ready to explode, aren't they? They're just waiting for something good to happen, and then they're just going to be going crazy. Well, they're already going crazy, but they're going to have something actually that happened on the field that for the first time in like 8 years that they can go crazy about. I just think I'll start with Georgia, and I'll mirror a lot of the things that Chad had to say about this team trips up every year. They are the most talented roster, most talented depth chart in the division year in, year out. It's been a long time since they were. Basically, since Urban Meyer left Florida, Georgia's been the most talented team in this division year in and year out. And they have not gotten to the championship game a few times during that span. I think the defense, again, the personnel, it reminds me of 2012 when they had NFL players all over the place and the defense was good, but it wasn't that good. It wasn't great. It wasn't elite like we would expect it to be. Jeremy Pruitt's gotten himself a raise, and he should, at this point, needs to live up to that $1.3 million salary. He's propped as a teacher, as an instructor, and he's going to have to pour all that experience into this Georgia defense because, again, I think defensively, I think they've got a great secondary, and I think they've got guys like Lorenzo Carter and Jordan Jenkins, Leonard Floyd. They are stacked up front in the front seven that they could be extremely good defensively, but haven't been. Something's been missing in the past. Issues at quarterback, possibly. Question marks don't necessarily equal issues, but at this point, it's a big question mark with either Grayson Lambert coming in from Virginia, and he was marginal there. Now, he finds himself in a place where he's going to be surrounded by more talent, offensive skill position players, despite Georgia's losses at wide receiver. The talent he's surrounded by at Georgia is far and beyond anything he experienced in Charlottesville with the Cavaliers. So Grayson Lambert is a guy that runs around and he can make plays with his feet and with his arm. Has not been consistent, started 9 games with Virginia last season. We got a quick look at Bryce Ramsey at the end of last season. He came in relief of Hudson Mason. They really didn't let him do much in the bowl game against Louisville. That was Nick Chubb's game, of course. And so the thing I like about the Georgia offense, in addition to the running game, which is an obvious check the box right there with a running game in the offensive line with 4 starters back, is that Brian Schottenheimer, while he's taken his criticism based on NFL offensive rankings of yardage and points scored, he was in 2 pretty difficult situations with the St. Louis Rams and the New York Jets. I think what he did with those 2 teams, and specifically the Jets, is he took a running game, maximized what he had, really emphasized play action off the running game, and he's got similar personnel and a similar mindset. Georgia wants to do that. They want to establish the run, and then they'll hit you downfield with the play action. So I think his scheme fits what they've already done and what the personnel is with the Bulldogs. Man, I'm talking myself into a Georgia win for the Eastern Division here is what I'm doing. But anyway, I'll stick with Tennessee to go 6-2, just like Georgia at 6-2, but they win the game head-to-head in Knoxville. And like Chad said, this Oklahoma game intrigues me. Tennessee showed us in playing Oklahoma, if you watched the game, didn't look at the score, just watched the game, that physically and in regards to talent and speed, they could match Oklahoma. They just made too many mistakes in that game couldn't hang on the scoreboard because of it and fell apart in the fourth quarter. Now they've got Oklahoma coming into Knoxville, and that's going to be a barometer game. Of course, it counts nothing toward the division standings, but in terms of Tennessee gaining some confidence, understanding where they are, playing a big-time opponent, a top 15 to 20 team, and looking good and drawing from that game, that's going to be interesting to see where they stack up after 2 weeks against Oklahoma. Then they dive right into it the last week of September with the date at Florida. Of course, they've lost 10 straight. Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama. That's brutal. Florida, Arkansas, Georgia, Alabama consecutively before it eases off. So if they can get through that stretch, maybe lose one. If they can go 3-1, and of course the Georgia game's going to be pivotal, then I see good things for Tennessee. Back-to-back top 5 recruiting classes. This roster's in a unique position where it's still extremely young, but it's experienced at most positions. It's experienced, and they have really recruited at defensive back, which Chad mentions the injury issue there, but they are deep at defensive back and at wide receiver. Josh Dobbs is my best quarterback in the SEC based on the final 5 games of last year. So I got Tennessee breaking a tie with Georgia at 6-2 in the Eastern Division, winning head-to-head and going to Atlanta to the SEC championship game. So there you have it. My neck's on the line, Chad, with Tennessee going to Atlanta.
Wow, you took a big step forward, my friend. I'm not saying they can't, just because I'll always go back to the point that I don't know that anybody saw Mississippi State being number 1. So I'm not saying that they can't. It's just there are some issues being young and some questions around, if they do take any more hits in the injury, department, how they're going to be sitting, because we know that this is not a sprint. It's a marathon in the SEC, week in, week out. You're going to get some top-ranked teams. Of course, in the East, it's not as pivotal, I guess, as it is in the West. The West it's every weekend. You're probably going up against a top 25 team. So it's believable, Mark. I'll say that. I can believe that it can happen. So let's just say that.
Mizzou was believable the last 2 years.
That's true. I got nothing.
The West is crazy just because it's so good. And I'm going to pick up a few haters by saying it's not quite as good as people think it is, but it's still the best division in college football. I just don't think it's a huge gap, but it's still the best. No weak teams. Everybody's good. These are 7 of the top 25 teams in the country, regardless of whether Mississippi State or an Arkansas or an Ole Miss maybe lose some games they need to win and maybe fall to 3-5 or 2-6, regardless of the records, regardless of what the outcomes are, because they have to play each other so much. And it's somebody's got to lose these games. So you may have some teams ranked outside the top 25 because they finished 6-6. But I'm saying right now, like Arkansas last year and finishing 7-6 after the bowl victory, they were a top 25 team in my eyes, even though they didn't finish in the top 25 because the early season losses. So I'm going to be on record saying the same thing, that these are 7 of the top 25 teams in college football. So, wow, do you got a winner for us, Chad?
Yeah, actually more so. I know this division is a lot more competitive in that aspect, but for me, I think that it's a little bit, for whatever reason, I can actually point to who I believe is possibly going to be the one to wave the flag for the SEC out of the Western Division. A little clearer than maybe I can in the Eastern Division, just because I think there's so much turmoil in that side of it. But in the West, I want to look at. I'm going to go down the line here and kind of look at the teams that the teams that I look at to be competitive and things of that nature, and just start with Alabama. It's a good a place as any to start right now. With questions pertaining to the quarterback position, we know that Alabama has won 2 national titles with a first-year starter in 2009 and 2012. Whether it's going to be Coker or Morris, I think those are your 2 leading. Some people want to sprinkle Bateman in there. I think Morris is the more cerebral of the bunch just because he's been there so long. He's the only one with a national title ring out of the entire bunch. He was behind, he sat in with A.J. McCarron and a lot of these guys. He's done his time. I do feel like that Wisconsin game You're going to learn a lot about that position because Wisconsin has got a senior-laden, an upperclassman-laden secondary, and they're going to test the the passing game of Alabama. I think that's going to be a real key for Alabama to come out and to be able to establish that pretty early on against some pretty good competition in Wisconsin. Our Darius Stewart's a guy I'm looking at to have a big year at the wide receiver position. Can he separate himself from the rest of the guys? He's been doing really good in fall camp. I think if anybody gets a nod for the start, it's probably going to be Coker, just because of the fact that he did transfer from Florida State and he is the senior out of the group. I feel like he may get the nod, but everything I've been hearing coming out of T-Town is that it's possibly going to be a 2-quarterback game, which to me, I really kind of question going up against a team like Wisconsin, who is salty year in, year out. It's not exactly a team you want to flip a coin against and say, oh, we'll just try this out. That's not a team you want to do that against. Wisconsin, again, last year very well should have beaten LSU to start off the season, and rightfully so. So I think that's a game I really question. But Alabama, to me, the games that really are going to matter for me is when they come. They have the LSU matchup. That's going to be big. Then, of course, you talk about Arkansas coming to town. Arkansas defense and the defensive coordinators are already salty about this game, Mark, just because of the fact that it's scheduled for homecoming. So they feel disrespected in that aspect, because you always schedule the cupcake at homecoming. So they're already fired up about that, and it's not even we haven't even kicked off the first weekend. So, and then, of course, you've got the Iron Bowl for Auburn, because I think Auburn is going to be the team to possibly beat out of the Western Division this year. And I know a lot of people are probably going to be, flipping me the bird watching this right now or giving me some hate, but I think they're going to be the team to beat out of the West. With that being said, Alabama, I look at the Wisconsin game. We're going to learn a lot about this team, where they're at. They do have some depth issues at the running back position that I think are, could catch up to them. They need Scarborough back as soon as possible, which he's on the 4-game suspension. And then, of course, you've got Henry and you've got Drake. Drake's going to be used a lot in the passing attack. So I think that's going to be an area where he can bail out the quarterback for the first-year starter. Then you've got on the road at Georgia. Like I said, Arkansas at A&M with Chief Chavis there taking the helm at A&M. That's going to be an interesting story as we go along this season. Then you got Tennessee coming to town. Again, I don't think Tennessee's at the level to beat in Alabama yet at all. And then, of course, LSU on November 7th. You got Mississippi State. And then, of course, you end the season with Auburn on the road. The key games for me for Alabama are, can they get the road wins, over a Georgia, over an Auburn. Mississippi State, I think Mississippi State's going to fall off this year. I don't think they can get a double-digit win record this year. I just think there's going to be a little drop-off there. So those are the games I look at. The Ole Miss game is going to be redemption for Alabama. After last year, Drake got hurt in that game. Of course, the last time Ole Miss traveled to Alabama, they got blanked 24-0. So, I mean, there could be a duplication of that. I think this Alabama defense, mark my words right now, and no pun intended, Mark, but this defense is probably one of the nastiest defenses in the SEC this season. And if Alabama is able to get to the SEC championship, a lot of it's going to be rested on the shoulders of this defense. The secondary has got some ridiculous talent. Minkah Fitzpatrick, of course, Tony Brown, world-class speedster there. They've got some legit talent on that defensive side of the ball, NFL talent. So Alabama is one of my guys that I have riding in that front seat for the SEC Western Division title, just because their record or their schedule kind of sets them up really nicely to get there, for the exception of the 2 road games with Georgia and Auburn. Then, of course, Arkansas. You talked about Arkansas and their 7-6 finish. There's a lot of hype going into this season. They lose their star running back, Jonathan Williams, coming into this season. And here's the misconception by a lot of people in national media, regional media, wherever it may be, even the fans. The conception is that the perception is that you lose that running back. Well, all of a sudden now your winning chances are going to be lessened. If you've paid attention to Arkansas and Brett Bielema when he was at Wisconsin, you'll know, Mark, you could put a jersey on, I could put a jersey on. The way that offensive scheme is ran with those offensive linemen up in the front and the way the tight ends are on these wham blocks, creating upfield blocks to get separation, it's all about the scheme on the offense. Not so much about the running back per se. Yes, you got to have some talent. You got to be fast. You got to be tough to play that position. That's granted. But I really think that offensive line and how the offensive scheme is set up really complements the running back and sets that running back up to look like a stud, just based on how they run things. I don't necessarily think that they're going to be that much of a fall off with Cody Walker coming in. Mark, I've sat next to this young man here a couple of weeks ago. He's a legit 258 pounds at 6'2", and it's not baby fat. He's probably less than 10% fat on him. He's a big boy. And he got another year extension for the NCAA, so they're going to have him for another year. Alex Collins is slimmed down to 215, trying to work on his breakaway speed. He's been caught a lot once he brought into the second level. You had a lot of secondary players catching him when he got past the linebackers. Just didn't have that finishing speed. So I look at this team and I say, all right, UTEP, Toledo, Texas Tech, all great games to get you warmed up, especially considering you lost Jonathan Williams. Now it gives these guys some real opportunity to feel the heat, feel the pressure being a starter. Key game for wins for me, A&M. You've got to get that win versus A&M early on in September. It sets the tone. Then you go on the road, not once but twice, back-to-back SEC teams on the road, back-to-back weeks. The only team in the conference that does that this season. So it's really going to be tough for them on the road. They've got to go 2-2 on the road. Somehow they've got to beat a Tennessee, a Bama, an Ole Miss, or an LSU. Ole Miss and LSU are going to be looking for redemption after getting blanked last year. And Ole Miss was in a lull considering that they lost Treadwell to Auburn, a couple of weeks prior. The team just wasn't there. LSU pretty much quit that game at halftime. Let's be honest, in Fayetteville last year. It was not the LSU we've seen in the past. It's going to be a little different this year with Harris at the helm. I think there's going to be a little bit different mentality. Again, 8-4 for an Arkansas team, I think is really good. And I think that's where I've got them right now, is about an 8-4 finish. Auburn is the team that you've got, it's either one or the other. You've got hot and cold on this team. You've got people in media, fans, whatever. Oh, they're going to be really good, or oh man, I don't know. They're not SEC championship. This is the team that I think honestly could make a run at the SEC championship because one, how their schedule kind of sets them up. Two, they actually have a defensive coordinator that's going to be able to keep teams from scoring 20 plus points possibly with the personnel that they've got. With Frost, McKenzie, these guys that they've got on the defensive side of the ball. Where I'm really scared about this team as they go along, not the sprint, but the marathon, is the secondary. Can they stay healthy enough to keep their starters on the field in that secondary? That's a question for this team. And then, of course, they get Alabama at home. They turn around, and I believe they get Georgia at home. Yes, the A&M game on the road. The Arkansas game on the road. That one's going to be a big game. There's been a lot of heat. Now there's some flack between these two teams now. After Bielema came out this last week and pretty much just said, I don't think I have to tell you guys how much I hate Auburn. So that rivalry has pretty much kind of flamed itself back up, and it's going to be a hot game come October. So I look at at LSU, at Arkansas as the main away games that Auburn's got to get. And then, of course, at A&M with Chavis there, I think that's going to be one of concern. But honestly, their road, they start off with a Louisville team. I think Auburn is – I'm not going to say they're far superior to a Louisville because I think Bobby Petrino is always a jack of all trades. He's kind of a trickster in that sense. I think he's got a really good, powerful offense. I've seen it in Arkansas. It's definitely going to be a test for Auburn early on, and I feel like Auburn can come out with their personnel and the athletes they have on their team. I think they could definitely get that win, but it's one of my big question marks for them, and I think that sets the tone for their entire season, honestly. If Auburn can go in there and they can pull one out over Louisville first off and then do a great job against LSU on the road in September, I think the roadway is going to be open for them with Jeremy Johnson, at the quarterback position. LSU, for me, LSU is some people have them finishing fourth. Some people have them finishing fifth in the SEC Western Division. I think this is a team that is going to be highly predicated on the success of how the quarterback does. And Harris is going to be the guy that gets the nod at the starting position. He's going to have a Malachi Dupree. He's going to have a Durrell. They've lost to Starter and Mills in the secondary at the safety position on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to be light in the pants at the defensive tackle position behind Godshaw and Lacouture. They've pretty much got one guy that's really going to be dependable there in that position. Do look for Washington and a couple of those guys on the defensive end positions after Asco and those guys left to possibly step up and have some big-time seasons. The young freshmen at the defensive ends are probably going to come up pretty good around Game 6, Game 7 for LSU. So I think this LSU team, I'm not going to go out on a helm like the guys did the other day on ESPN College Football and say that they're going to be national title contenders. I don't think, and I know a lot of people have them that way, but if you look at this roster, LSU is deep. We know that. They're a team that's deep in athleticism. But if you look at what they've got coming up schedule-wise, at Mississippi State, at South Carolina, followed by a Florida game at home. Florida plays LSU differently. This is a deep-seated rivalry, and it's always come down to defense between these two teams. If you get down to it, it's been single digits that have kept the winner or loser, been the difference between the two. So I look at that game as being a key game. At Alabama, Arkansas comes in on the 14th. That November stretch for LSU is absolutely ridiculous. On the road at Ole Miss, probably should have lost the game last year to Ole Miss in Death Valley, which was a night game. The poor performance by Wallace, you can say what you want. You can point the finger, blame, whatever, was probably the reason why they didn't win that game. So I think that game could be redemption. Plus, the last time LSU traveled to Ole Miss and played in Oxford, I don't know what happened to that team. I think they went out and got drunk the night before, but they got hammered on the field versus Ole Miss in Oxford. And it will be a night game. This is a very deep-seated rivalry in the Southeastern Conference, so I think that's going to be a key. Can LSU get to the promised land? No. I'm telling you, I think it's third, fourth place finish for this team. I don't think that they're at the point now that they can. I think their defense is going to have to get some more depth into it on that defensive front. Next year be a different story. Fournette's going to be one of the leading running backs, but he's going to have to carry a lot of the load on his shoulders with guys behind him. Ole Miss is going to be – Ole Miss to me has probably got about 7 guys that could probably be drafted in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft in 2016 together with the fact that you've got Kimdichie brothers coming out, Isaac Gross, several guys, Tony Connor. Those are going to be several guys that are going to be high on people's lists towards the end of the season. Can Ole Miss be the team to get there? They looked like it last year, and I'll be honest with you, Mark, if they had a running game to help Wallace out, they probably would have been a formidable team to make it to the 4-T playoff. And that's the biggest question. They lost their 4-star running back that was coming in this season. He had to have surgery. So he's going to be out for the season. Makes me question, can they get the running back position in place? Can they get it to where they need it to be so that they can be effective in this season? And I don't know that they are. Either way, if it's Kelly or Buchanan that takes the helm at the starting position for Ole Miss, the quarterback position is going to be solid for them. You got Ingram. You got Treadwell back. They've got some depth at that wide receiver position. It's just, can they get a running game? If they can, then Ole Miss is going to be the team to watch for. But right now, I'm not real confident that running game is there from everything I've heard coming out of camp. So I look at them. They go to Alabama. That's going to be their key game. I don't see them winning that game. They got Vanderbilt. For whatever reason, Vanderbilt and Ole Miss play each other very tightly for whatever reason. Maybe it's because they're about 4 hours away from each other. I'm not sure. But then you go on the road to Florida. That's going to be a hostile environment for them to go to. I think they can get that win. At Memphis, people want to say Memphis has got a decent team. They have got a very good team. They've got a defensive smash mouth team that could sneak up on this Ole Miss team. And I'm glad to see these two teams playing each other again. A&M, key game, I think, for Ole Miss. At Auburn is going to be a massive game for them. I think that game for Ole Miss is going to be a redemption game, and that's a game for Auburn that is key as well to them making it to the SEC Western Division title, is can they beat Ole Miss? This Ole Miss team, despite any other game that's on this schedule for them, that one right there is circled in every player's book, I promise you, after the way it finished last year. If they would have beat Auburn in that game, we'd been talking about Ole Miss heading to the 14 playoff. Just because they would have beaten Auburn and Alabama, the road would have been clear for them. So I think that's going to be huge. Arkansas, LSU, and Mississippi State to finish out the year. Mississippi State always plays spoiler. Getting Arkansas and LSU at home really benefits Ole Miss. I could possibly see those both being night games just because if everything plays out correctly. They've got to go 2-1 in November. I think they can probably drop one, but still, can Ole Miss be a one-loss team? I'm not 100% sold on that yet. Mississippi State, like I told you before, I think there's going to be a drop back. Dak's going to be asked to do a lot of the passing on his shoulders. When that happens, the team is just not near as effective. Plus, they were one of the worst teams statistically on defense, especially passing defense last year in the SEC, finishing second to last in some categories. Can they work that with a new defensive coordinator? Not 100% sure. It's a wait and see with them, Mark. So I'm feeling with those guys probably 8-4, 9-3. They're definitely not getting a double-digit win from Mississippi State. A&M, if I'm going to give you a dark horse out of this entire conference, it's these guys. It's A&M. And I'll tell you because I think John Chief Chavis can do more with less, and he's proven it with the NFL caliber players that have played in the NFL, the guys that that we see on SEC Nation that are talking, that are previous LSU players. I mean, just the fact that he came from Tennessee, came to LSU. I mean, he's got the record to prove that he can put guys in the league. A&M's got talent, and whether people want to realize that or not, they've got a lot of talent on that team. They're going from a read and react defense to a very physical, in-your-face type of defense, and that is where you're going to see a big change in how they approach the run. Statistically, yes, the last 2 seasons they have finished dead last in total defense in the division, out of the entire SEC. It's been awful. Running defense has been pretty much non-existent. They've given up over 11,000 yards of offense in 2 seasons. So that should tell you a lot. That's a lot to turn around for this guy. But if there's a guy that can do it, I think it's him. So that being said, this is my dark horse pick out of the Western Division. Some people are gonna be like, "Well, you're not picking Arkansas. You're not picking." No, I'm going with the team I think that could really, if the defense can do like I said with Auburn, just hold some teams to 20, 25 points. I think that this team right here could be the one that you need to watch out for. With key games, Arizona State. I think that's a huge matchup to start off. We're going to learn a lot about A&M right off the bat, and if they can beat a highly ranked Arizona State in the preseason AP poll. Because A&M didn't really get that much love. It says a lot for A&M, and I think going forward that could set the tone and momentum. Allen's going to have a lot on his shoulders this season, and so is Myles Garrett and the rest of that defensive group. The linebacking unit of A&M is going to be really key. How much can they step up? And then, of course, they play Arkansas. I think that's a huge game for them. Arizona State and Arkansas, both in September, are going to be huge games for A&M. They've got to step up. They've got to make big-time plays in those games. Can't give up the big plays. They're going to have to play very physical defense against Arkansas if they want to get that win this year, I think, because there's a lot more weapons on that offensive side of Arkansas this season than there has been in the previous 2 seasons. Mississippi State, not really so much. I think A&M pulls that one out easy. Auburn at home. Again, if Auburn wants to get to that, the Eastern or the Western Division, they want to be the title winner there. They want to be in Atlanta playing for the SEC championship game. They're going to have to get past an A&M. A&M gets them at home. This could be a very tricky game for Auburn to get past. And then at Ole Miss, South Carolina, Auburn, Alabama, Auburn. You got Vanderbilt at LSU. Again, A&M, with the way their schedule works out for them, they really only have to worry about a few key games, and most of them are their away games. And if you can come out 2-2 in your away games, or at least 3-1, which is what they really are going to have to do, they need to come out 3-1. If they can do that, A&M may be the ones in the driver's seat. So I wouldn't be shocked by that.
Man, that is good stuff, man. Take a breather, Chad. Take a long break there. Very nice. That's good stuff. I can't add a whole lot to that, so I'm not going to belabor the analysis. I'm going to get right to the picks here. I'll throw in my 2 cents here and there, but Mississippi State, I agree, is going to fall off. They are the best last place team in any division in college football. Dak is what most people consider to be the best quarterback in the conference. They're dramatically going to miss the bowling ball Josh Robinson in the running game. From what I could see from them defensively is that they have talent in the secondary. Of course, Will Redmond's one of the best in the business. Their defensive pass rush was non-existent late in the season, and they got carved to shreds. It was more so blown coverages early in the season, and then it was the pass rush. So Chris Jones needs to wake up and play the kind of football that he did 2 years ago for the Bulldogs to scare some people in the West. So I've got them going at 3-5. And let's remind everybody, all these games, somebody's got to win, somebody's got to lose. So some of these records aren't going to line up with the talent level on the team, but these games have to be lost by somebody. So Mississippi State at 3-5, they go 7-5 because they play nobody. And you know what I think about that. Nobody in the non-conference. I got Arkansas at 4-4, and they get a clean sweep over their non-conference opponents, including this Texas Tech game where they ran roughshod over them on the road in Lubbock last season. I see more of the same this year. Arkansas, I do have some concerns on defense, even though I hear a lot of people think they're going to be better defensively this season without Martell Spate and Darius Philon, Trey Flowers off the edge. I could see a drop-off defensively from what we saw that late in the season where they were dominant on that side of the ball, specifically those 2 shutouts against Ole Miss and LSU, and also the big bowl win over Texas. Although those three offenses, aside from Ole Miss, the other two non-existent, and Ole Miss was just beat up and banged up and mentally down for that game. So the Razorbacks are going to have to prove over the course of a full season. We're riding this hype on basically 2 SEC wins late in the season over 2 teams that were beat up offensively. So I want to see it out of the Hogs for a full season, but I expect them to go 4-4 and 8-4 in the overall record. Ole Miss, again, you mentioned the lack of a running game, and that's really what concerns me again this season. So they slung it around pretty well with Bo Wallace, although he did have his down points. Obviously, their receiving core is extremely good coming back. Somebody really needs to step up. When you think about this division and what's at the core of this division, it's LSU, Alabama running downhill between the tackles. Those are the teams that have won the division. We've gotten away from that to a certain extent. Obviously, Auburn is going to be more pass happy this year with Jeremy Johnson out of the pocket rather than the Nick Marshall and the triple option attack. But you need to run it. You need to run it in the fourth quarter. You need to run the ball in November, and Ole Miss can't do that. I don't like the inexperience at quarterback, regardless of who wins the job. Most likely going to be Chad Kelly. I don't like the Rebels' inexperience at quarterback and the lack of a running game, although I love the defense. I thought it was the best regular season defense in college football. They do lose a ton, including, of course, Cody Pruitt out of the secondary. But another issue in this is that they bring C.J. Johnson from the defensive end spot back to the Mike linebacker position, where he's going to have to make the call. So that's where they recruited him out of high school. They moved him to D-end, but they are so thin at linebacker, they needed him to take over there. But I still think the Rebels are very formidable and go 4-4 in the SEC. And again, nobody on the non-conference slate that really scares me from a Power 5 standpoint, although you make a great point about Memphis, who went out to UCLA, scared the Bruins, and also had Ole Miss in a 10-3 game in the fourth quarter before they gave up some late touchdowns. So Memphis is tough. Your dark horse, Chad, is my dark horse. I love Texas A&M to possibly really jump up here and scare some people, and it's because of the analysis you ran down with John Chavis coming in as defensive coordinator. So we've seen the recruiting rankings and we see the amount of talent that's coming into College Station. So we have not seen the results on the field defensively. I think they brought a Big 12 mentality on defense to the SEC, and they just weren't at that talent level or that tenacious mindset that we have to take punishment and we got to dole out punishment against the Leonard Fournettes and Derrick Henry's play after play after play. You don't have to do that in the Big 12. So it's been a complete culture change for the defense, and they haven't adapted well. Now they have 3 consecutive highly ranked recruiting classes under their belt. Chavis should be the guy to get this turned around. Whether he does it in one season remains to be seen, but I expect marked improvement defensively. And I think they've got the best core of wide receivers in the country. Maybe none of them are elite, but as a group, across the board, Josh Reynolds, Speedy Noyle, Ricky Seals-Jones, they're exceptional. Kyle Allen, I was extremely impressed with his maturation going to the Plains in Auburn, his second week starting as a freshman, winning that game and then playing extremely well down the stretch. Really had a great bowl game after he recovered from an early pick 6 against West Virginia. I like Texas A&M to take some strides. But again, I love the early season matchup in week 1 against Arizona State. That's going to tell us a lot about Texas A&M. And we're going to see athletes all over the field for both of those teams. LSU, I've been an LSU supporter during the offseason because I see talent and depth and athleticism that you pointed to all over the place. I think it's the best secondary possibly in college football. I think they have the wideouts in Malachi Dupree and Trayvon Doral who could put up huge numbers if they can get the ball. Obviously, the quarterback's the big question. Brandon Harris was in over his head when he went to Auburn last year, and that was his one big start, and it did not go well. We'll see if all this offseason work has made him a different player, a different leader in the huddle. They don't need him to go 25 for 30 and throw for 300 yards. They need 5 big plays, chunk plays. I'm not talking 75-yard plays. I'm talking big down 3rd and 8 conversions. I'm talking 35-yard plays to Doral or Dupree. They need like 5 plays a game to support the running game. Look at what they did against Ole Miss. They ran it down their throats for the 1 touchdown drive of the entire game. Then they flipped the touchdown pass from 1 yard out, but they ran it with Fournette like 10 consecutive plays. So LSU can survive with a running game, but they need no mistakes out of the passing game, and they need like 12 for 20 kind of efforts, 10 for 17 kind of efforts out of the passing game, throw for 150 yards, and throw in critical conditions. We'll see if they can get that done. I've got LSU at 5-3 in the conference, 9-3 overall. And I'm disappointed with LSU not playing anybody out of conference. It was Wisconsin. They played Virginia Tech in the past. They usually schedule somebody really, really big to get excited about. This year, they go to the Carrier Dome to take on Syracuse. They might be the worst team in the ACC. All right, I'm left with Auburn and Alabama. I've got these two teams tied for the division championship at 6-2. I think Bama wins the Iron Bowl. Best front seven. It's close with Ohio State, but best front seven in college football. I think they're going to terrorize offenses, and I think they're going to fix all the issues they had in the secondary last year. That wasn't because they were void of talent. You know what the recruiting situation is at Alabama. They are loaded in the secondary. For whatever reason, they had a lot of breakdowns in the secondary. I don't see that happening again this year. I think they're going to solve the problems in the secondary. I'm totally on board, Chad, with the analysis at quarterback for week 1. West Virginia gave them a challenge last year, and they gave Blake Sims the job. They let him get his feet wet. He threw it a lot, but he didn't throw difficult passes. They didn't ask him to do a lot. He threw a lot of safe passes in that game. They got him warmed up. They got through that game 1 by 10. Wisconsin's not West Virginia. They're not elite. They're not Ohio State. They're not USC. They don't bring elite talent, but it's Wisconsin. They will show up and play extremely hard. They're going to be fundamentally sound. They're not going to make a whole lot of mistakes, and they are brutal along the offensive front and in the running game. So they're going to be, you talk about a matchup for the ages. It's Wisconsin's running game against that Alabama front seven. So Alabama's going to need to not fool around too much at the quarterback position because Wisconsin's no joke. I do expect the Tide, based on sheer talent, to make 4 or 5 plays that Wisconsin can't make and win the game, but they can't play around too much with the Badgers. We saw what they did for 3 quarters against Wisconsin before Melvin Gordon got hurt. All right, so that leaves us with Auburn. Going to be interested to see Jeremy Johnson and Duke Williams. I think it could be the best pass-catch combination in the SEC. As you mentioned, Chad, there's this split vote on Auburn. Are they a college football playoff contender, or are they going to turn in another 8-5 because the defense isn't going to be fixed in 1 year under Will Muschamp? I see players in the defense who are extremely good. I think the secondary holds the key because I love the tackles. They've got Carl Lawson back. Will Muschamp has proven that he brings something to a defense. Despite the issues overall at Florida, the defense was top 10 in the country the last 3 seasons. So despite all those losses, he knows what he's doing on defense, and he can work with athletes. They're just a little thin still, and the secondary is a question mark for me at Auburn. But despite Jonathan Jones, one of the better cornerbacks in the SEC. So I got Bama and Auburn at 6-2, and I got the Tide winning the Iron Bowl to get to Atlanta. And I even wrote down a score here, Chad. You got Bama 31, Tennessee 17 in the SEC title game.
Way to go, man. You went the extra step. I wasn't going that far.
I had a long time to listen to you.
It's I've said this, and I'm going to keep saying it. It's a wait and see type of season. I think you're not really going to get a good feel for a lot of these teams until after week 3. That's just me. Yeah,
I can certainly see it. A lot of question marks. But I appreciate you diving in on the predictions when you weren't ready to go that direction. So I put Chad out there, and he delivered.
I appreciate the opportunity, Mark. It's been fun.
All right, Chad Niebling on the line with us from V Sporto and from Fansided. Check out his work there, because you talk about a guy that's all over the SEC and writing specifically, from what I see, Arkansas with Fansided. Chad's all over it. So you got to check out the writing and also a number of podcasts that he has, 7 or 8 of them across the SEC with V Sporto. So, Chad, thanks so much. And hopefully we're going to catch up here soon.
All right, man. Thank you. Let's do it again.